But I'd like to bring Marty Seligman, Professor of Psychology at University of Pennsylvania, into the conversation now. You have some of your work to share with His Holiness. Thanks, Martin.
It's a great honor to sit with you today, Holiness. More than a decade ago, when I became president of the American Psychological Association, it was my task to look at what psychologists did well and what they didn't do well. What they did well was misery and suffering and depression and drug addiction and schizophrenia, post-traumatic stress disorder. But what they didn't do well was what makes life worth living, the positive side of life. So it's been my mission for the last decade to do research, to galvanize the social sciences to work on what people freely choose to do when they're not oppressed. And this defines the field of positive psychology. So people said to me, well, you want to work on happiness? And I said, no, not exactly. That happiness has become over the centuries something that has very different meanings to different people and was scientifically unwieldy. So, unwieldy, hard to work with, too vague, hard to do science on. And so we break into 4 different disciplines in positive psychology. So the first is about happiness. It's the study of positive emotion. And so, for example, people interested in this look at the most catastrophic thoughts that people say when bad events happen and how to find a realistic perspective on catastrophic thoughts. So we teach people to argue against the catastrophic and to see good possibilities. So one field is positive emotion. A second field is meaning. I think human beings ineluctably want to be part of something bigger than they are, to belong to and serve something bigger than they are. So we ask people to identify their highest strengths, their highest virtues, humor, fairness, kindness, and to learn to use them more, particularly in difficult tasks, and to use them to be part of something larger than they are. So positive emotion is one discipline, meaning is a second discipline.
Yes.
The third discipline that people in positive psychology work on is positive relationships, how to get along better with people. And so, for example, there have actually been discoveries that I didn't know 10 years ago in this area, in which if you tell me something in traditional marital therapy, what you do is you teach people to argue better with each other. So you're trying to change insufferable marriages into being barely tolerable. But in positive psychology,
yes.
In positive psychology, we teach people to celebrate together. Rather, when something good happens, if you tell me something enormously good that happened to you, the technique not of being destructive about it, but of getting you to relive it and to elaborate it and to be part of it. So the third discipline is positive relationships. And the fourth discipline is positive accomplishment, mastery, competence, achievement. And so we look, for example, at high grit, people who never give up, highly perseverant people, people with high self-control. And we ask, how do you build that? So those are the 4 things that positive psychologists do and work on. And the way they apply it is they ask the question, if you teach people early in life techniques of positive emotion, of engagement, of meaning, of good relationships, of accomplishment, can you prevent many of the ills of life, depression, anxiety, anger? And so one of the main things that we do now is we go to whole schools. This actually started a few years ago here in Victoria at Geelong Grammar. We took this entire school. We taught the 200 faculty members techniques that we knew about, among them meditation, for positive emotion, meaning, relationships, and achievement. And then the teachers spend 2 weeks learning these in their own lives, and then we follow the students and ask how did their students do. And in 21 replications across the world, we found that when we teach teachers these techniques, they embed them in what they teach, and the students are less depressed, less anxious, and do better. So that's the main endeavor we're engaged in. And I just have a couple of final things I want to say, particularly related to some of Natasha's questions and your answers about consciousness and clarity and reality. So I have a different thought about that. But let me tell you what the great aim of positive psychology is, something that neither you nor I will be alive to see. But I call it 51. And I'll say the aim and then I'll say why I think about it. That in the year 2051, 51% of the world's population will be flourishing. Now, let me say what I mean by flourishing.
Yes, okay. Yes.
Now, since positive psychology says positive emotion, meaning, relationships, achievement, Felicia Huppert, who's probably here today from Cambridge, an epidemiologist, went to the 23 European Union nations, 2,000 adults in each of the nations, and measured the extent to which each of these adults have those four things in their life. And she found that 32% of Danes were flourishing, 15% of Brits were flourishing, and 5% of Russians. Now, I think...
Oh, I see, the number.
Yes, so you can measure the extent to which an entire nation is flourishing.
Yes.
So the aim then becomes learning these techniques for increasing positive emotion, meaning, relationships, and accomplishment.
Yes.
Can we, by the year 2051, have 51% of adults flourishing? Now, part of the reason this is so important to me is the downstream effects of flourishing, the downstream, the consequences of flourishing. So very often we try to tackle problems head on, like depression and anxiety, peace. But there's good reason to believe that when people are flourishing, by this definition of having positive emotion, meaning, and the like, that they're physically healthier, they live longer, they're more productive, they have less depression and anxiety, and they are at peace. So that is the rationale for 51. Now, the final thing I wanted to say, which was touched off by your remarks on clarity and consciousness. The summary, I think, of what I've been after the last 10 years is that the first great error of psychology for almost a century was to only think about the negatives and not to think about the positives. So positive psychology attempts to correct for that. But I think there's another great error, even deeper than that, and it's about consciousness. So psychology and the social sciences have been sciences of the past. They've said we are driven by the past. We're creatures of the past. I don't think that's true, and I think the findings have turned out to show that social sciences based on human beings being pushed by the past don't work very well. Rather, I want to suggest that we are drawn by the future. We are pulled by the future, and that consciousness is not just about perceiving reality now, but what's going on in your consciousness now as I'm talking is you're running simulations of the future about how what I'm saying might impact what you do and say in the future. So I think one of the massive functions of our big brain is to run simulations of the future and then to choose among them And in this view, consciousness is not just about the past and reality and the present, it's about the future and how we will be pulled into the future. Thank you.
Right. Hmm? As it is very clear, the person who, I think, ignorant about these positive emotion, meaning, relations, accomplishment.
Relationships.
So you see, those people who have idea or knowledge about these more healthier, you mentioned, I think that's very true. Usually it's odd, I think the problem is we don't know. We simply consider these destructive emotion or negative emotion just a part of our mind. So we think just normal. Once we know, for example, anger, hatred, jealousy is something bad for my own health, then just awareness about that makes differences. So I think your experience, I think very convincing, very good. So there's no question. Now we are talking about consciousness is all emotion. It's part of mind. Of course, the word now, mind or consciousness, these things also, they, I think, are not very clear. At least I think Sanskrit word, or Tibetan word, is this sort of definition. So we call shepa. So I don't know.
Consciousness.
Consciousness, right?
Consciousness.
And subconsciousness, right?
Da balanyewe chuke. Balanyawa yoro. Balanyawa semjung.
바른 the sheba remare.
Yoro.
바른 the sheba remare.
Sheba remare. Lumet kadisavane.
Demenduji. Unconscious, did you go in a manner? I don't know. In any way, I think I just near Sheba Sandang and Sheba, and near Sheba Korich the ship. That this is what I think I just said that.
So the discussion here is in order
taking
to
that.
what I was trying to explain earlier, in order to make a distinction between what is constructive within the domain of mind, what is constructive and what is destructive. First of all, we need to have a very clear picture of what mind is, the definitions of mind.
I think Buddhist science, it will start something like this: existence and non-existence. Within the existence, some are permanent, some are not impermanent, momentarily changing. So the phenomena within the momentarily changing, there are three: physical, mind or consciousness, and then another third one, like time. Neither physical, neither consciousness, but some fact. So three categories. So then matter, further sort of divisions. Consciousness, further divisions. Then the third the phenomena, which is changing, in the nature of changing, there are also then different sorts of groups or categories, divisions like that. So there's a Buddhist, I think I should say Buddhist science. Then the psychology belongs here. Quantum physics, these are belong here. Maybe. Perhaps some maybe is related with this one. Time, right? To shame, yeah, so these are when we sort of categorize these things, no idea of positive, negative, just categorize.
Your Holiness, Martin is working, as he said, very closely with an Australian school called Geelong Grammar.
That's very good. That's very good.
Working with teachers and young people. And Geelong Grammar is a very wealthy school, and they've put a lot of investment into this collaboration. I wonder how you would see the positive psychology approach that Martin is researching, working, for example, in the Tibetan children's village in Dharamsala. How would you see a role for positive psychology and working with Tibetan children in that children's village?
네, 편도 예시로.
Yeah, surely there would be a great benefit.
But in any way, I think really worthwhile to make work and discuss, and through discussion, the Buddhist psychology and modern psychology, as I mentioned earlier. Some cases, I think Buddhist psychology, I think mainly related with deeper or longer sort of goal, long-term goal. The Western psychology deal with day-to-day life. So maybe more closer work, learn each other from their own experience or perspective. I think. Actually, I think about 20, 30 years ago, there's one scholar, actually who later is murdered, he wrote one new book,
A higher science of mind in Buddhism.
So the usual sort of text about emotional mind, we simply, you see, remain there. Now this scholar, you see, wrote one book. The Mishi Chabardi shung the dana yoridi su luri lot of Kisaya Marwa. Da Andanganzo Jardo Western psychology tone, Nyamyon Sawa later the Didi, Susan the Becky Queen, wasn't that a pandayori? This so short one.
So in fact, in the various Buddhist treatises or Buddhist texts, we do find the availability of explanations about the different workings of the mind, but they are not put together and formed as one solid text to study
No, I mean
mind.
here, different Buddhist school of thought, the usual text about mind belongs to lower school of thought. So higher school of thought occasionally mention there are different views, different understanding, but no book so far, but that scholar made a new book about the psychology or mind according to the higher school of thought. So that's a new book. So similarly, why not? You see, more research work with Western psychology, as I mentioned earlier, you see, dealing with day-to-day sort of problem. And all these, I think one difference is the Western sort of what's the knowledge through experiment.
May I comment, Your Holiness?
So I think very, very useful. So I'm responding to you. You see, so more synthesized ideas or text, then I think can be very useful, not only children's young age, but even to scholars. I think very, very useful. So that's one field we can further develop. This I feel, definitely. So you also have the responsibility to do something. And of course, Damdu as well. These who speak English, who knows, and some here also, you see, now they are younger scholars, younger generation of our scholar who speak English. I think now should just not only just to repeat 1,000-year-old sort of concept, more research, more discussion, and then produce some synthesized sort of new ideas, new books. I think very necessary. So you can help in that field. Certainly, this the 4 point, very nice, very practical, very useful. And you mentioned that I fully agree. I think our brain not only just collect about past as a memory, but we have a great ability, the imagination or vision about future. I think that's really, I think, very, very helpful to lead forward. Just think about past, finished. The past, finished. So I totally agree with that.
Martin?
My comment, also related to Natasha's question of you, I believe that if we redefine the goal of what a healthy mind is from psychology's traditional concern with a mind that's not suffering, not ill, not disordered, that's the wrong question. That the right question is how to create minds that are flourishing. When minds are flourishing, the suffering, I believe, is crowded out as a downstream. And to Natasha's comment about the relationship of Buddhism to modern science of this sort, the modern science I know is about single individuals. The goal of 51, that 51% of the world's population should flourish, is about large groups. So what are the magnifiers? What are the amplifiers? How can we go from individual knowledge to knowledge that will help change 51% of the world? And that's why I think Buddhism and the modern religions in our schools are the great magnifiers that can take these ideas and move them from the individual to all of us.
Yes. Actually, so that's one reason. If we say Buddhism, then immediately they create impression. That is something Buddhist, some concern for Buddhist, not other, and including non-believer. So Buddhist science, it is something universal, not only for Buddhist, but for Christians or Islam or non-believer. Buddhist science is, I think, common. That's universal. So that I think. So usually I describe secular ethics, nothing to do with religion, but simply how to be a more sensible human being, responsible human being. So that's our goal, not talking about God, not talking heaven or Kasachukti, nirvana, just this small planet, 6 billion human beings, be more harmonious, more peaceful. That's our goal. So something. So secular way, and then we can introduce in school, in education field, one part of the subject is the moral ethics, secular moral ethics. What do you think about secular? Because you see, some my friends, some Christians, some Muslim, they are rather hesitant, you see, to use the word of secularism.
Yes.
So their reason is secular means something negative towards religion. But when I use the secularism, mainly according to India, Indian constitution itself based on secularism. So look like Mahatma Gandhi, promoter of secularism, but he himself very, very religious-minded. So he respects all religions. And also, according to Indian sort of secularism, they also respect non-believer. Because, the 1,000-year, I think more than 2,000-year-old one school of thought, that's the view of nihilism. Jangbemba, Charvaka, who denying existence of next life, existence of karma, existence of God, simply this life. So it is non-believer. So the 1,000 years, you see, criticized that view by rest of different Indian sort of the spiritual sort of spirituality, condemned that it is nihilism. Yet people who hold that view refer rishi. Rishi means saint. Respect them. So India's secularism also respect non-believer. Respect nihilist. So that's non-believer. So I think it's, then it become universal. No difference of religion, no difference of believer or non-believer. And then you can't divide Eastern or Westerners.
Well,
I don't like it. So too much emphasis Eastern or Westerner. I don't like that.
I would agree.
We are same. Of course, mentally same, emotionally same. No differences.
Can I ask a question about that? Because, Martin, you have a very ambitious goal there. 51% of the world by 2051 you want to see flourishing. And so I have a question. This year I chaired a forum on suicide prevention in Western Australia, and we heard some very powerful stories about Indigenous Aboriginal children in Australia taking their life at age 9 or 10 or 12 this year. And so I wonder how you will apply your positive psychology investigations and work with the schools. How do we apply those principles to those children and communities where they are born into a situation of despair and difficulty from the beginning? How do we work with those communities?
Two comments. First on secular, and then on Natasha's comment. Within positive psychology, Your Holiness, the second great pillar is meaning and purpose, where using what is best inside you to belong and serve something you think is bigger than you are. Now, for many people, that's religious, and for some of them, it's supernatural religions. But I think for most of the world now, the larger things that we belong to and serve that bring us meaning and purpose are secular. But within positive psychology, these two are the same thing. They're part of the fact that we are a hive. We have hive emotions, want to be part of something more than the self. So that's my one thought on secular. And then Natasha, on suicide and depression, I've spent my entire life working on depression, suicide, and the negative emotions. And I don't mean to suggest for a moment that positive psychology should replace psychology as usual, that it should replace what we know about cognitive therapy, about psychopharmacology, about the prevention of depression. So I think we want to use all those tools. They're very imperfect, but I think we can also supplement those with the notion of the flourishing mind. Because very often, when the mind is flourishing, depression, anxiety, anger disappear.
How do we help, though, communities of particular need, where they're not going to have access to psychologists, but they do perhaps have access to schools,
Yes.
but they're starting out from a level of facilities and resources that's very low? So I'm thinking of children in Baghdad as well at the moment. You know?
I think there's quite a direct way of helping that, and that is on the model in which, if you think about what you most want for your children, it's happiness, lack of suffering, balance, being civilized. But what schools teach is literacy, numeracy, discipline, conformity. So imagine that our schools and our teachers were the custodians not just of workplace skills, but of life satisfaction, positive emotion, how to deal with depression. Now, that's what Australia has started to do. That was the Geelong Grammar program of positive education, in which our teachers learn both sets of skills, and then it turns out the students have less depression and the like. So I believe if we can change Australian education, world education, so that we teach the skills of the positive as well as the skills of the workplace, that 2051 will come sooner.
Good luck.